Welcome back. I am so thankful that you have taken the time to be a part of this series called Pre-Decide, where we've been talking about the power of our decisions. Our big idea so far has been that the quality of our decisions determines the direction of our lives. Now, the problem is that many of us tend to be really terrible decision makers. So what we've been doing is talking about decisions that we can make in advance so that when we encounter certain scenarios, we've already made our minds up about who we're going to be and what we're going to do. Today, we are pre-deciding that we are going to be radically generous people. Here's why this is so important. Because no one ever magically wakes up and decides all of a sudden, hey, I'm a generous person. We may want to be a generous person. We may occasionally donate to something or help someone out from time to time, but to demonstrate the consistent and oftentimes irrational generosity that we see in Scripture, that takes intentionality and planning. It requires us to decide in advance that we're going to be generous people, and then we have to implement a plan that helps us get there. Here's something our culture teaches us, that it's more blessed to get than to give. We see this idea everywhere. Every advertisement is screaming at you, if only you had this new car or these great shoes, and social media influencers top products given to them by companies so that we think, oh wow, that would really make my life better if only I had this or that. Our culture's teaching us it is more blessed to get than it is to give. As a culture, we believe this idea so much that an entire industry has sprung up to help us store all of our stuff. All you have to do is drive down the road and you will see storage space facilities. Why do we need a 2,000 square foot house, a 2-car garage, and a storage space that we rent? Because we believe that it's better to get than to give. But Jesus, he turns this idea on its head, and he teaches us this. And we see this saying in Acts chapter 20, verse 35. Jesus is recorded as saying, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Now, theoretically, a lot of us know this is true. So what keeps us from living that way? Well, one of the things that often keeps us from practicing this type of generosity is that we say, I would be more generous, but I just can't make it work right now. I will be more generous when I have more. The problem with this is that most of the time, if we haven't already made a habit out of being generous, when we get more, we just expand our lifestyle to consume the more that we get. There's this really interesting parable that Jesus tells us in the book of Luke that illustrates this. Jesus, he tells this story to illustrate how easily we fall into the mindset of consumption. Jesus says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain for many years. Take life easy, drink, be merry. So this rich man, he had an especially great harvest. And so all of a sudden, he discovered that he was now richer than he was before. So what does he do? Well, I'll tell you what he doesn't do. He doesn't pause and ask how to prioritize being generous. No, he expands his lifestyle to account for this increase in wealth. He builds bigger storehouses. He has his grain stored there, and he adopts a life of leisure and pleasure. A lot of us do the same thing. You get a bonus at work, you buy a new car. You get a promotion, you move to a nicer neighborhood with bigger houses. We find ourselves with enough money to finally live that life of leisure that we've dreamt of. we go for it. Unless we have pre-decided to be generous people, we will find that we let our lifestyles expand to use up what we have. Which is why we need to remember this idea. If you want to be generous when you have more, you need to learn to be generous when you have less. So, how do we learn to be generous? Well, let's start with this. Generous people plan to be generous. The NLT translates Isaiah 32:8 like this. And now we got to remember this verse is comparing the way of the righteous to the way of the wicked, and it says, "But generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity." The short of it is this: all of us have a plan with our finances. Some of us plan for future purchases, some of us plan for retirement, some of us say, I don't really have a plan, I just kind of use what I get. The truth is, that's still a plan. It's a plan to consume whatever is given to us. Now, when we pre-decide to live a generous life, we are pre-deciding to make a different kind of plan, a plan that puts our generosity first. Malachi 3:10 helps us see what that's like. God is speaking through his prophet Malachi in this passage and is offering up some much needed rebuke to the people of Israel. And he says, "Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me." But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that my food may be in my house. The idea of a tithe was that people were to bring 1/10 of their income, their grain, their livestock, their olive oil, things like that, and give it over to God. And here's an important detail. The tithe typically came from the first fruits. So before you did anything else with your income, you brought your tithe to the Lord. Now this is so important because when our first priority with our finances is being generous, it forces us to shape our lives around our commitment to give. If I pre-decide that the first thing I'm going to do with my income is designate a certain amount for generosity, to give to the church, maybe sponsor a few kids through World Vision, support ministries that help those in need, or bless people who I know need that extra help, then I become a regular and intentionally generous person. Not only being generous when I happen to have something left over, but being generous first and then ordering what I have left over to meet my own needs. You might be asking, if God is God and everything belongs to him, why does he care so much about what we do with our money? The answer is that what we do with our money shapes almost every other part of our existence. And the practice of a tithe can help us fight greed, learn contentment, and come to value the right things. This is why Proverbs, in teaching us about wise living, says this. This is Proverbs 21:26. Some people are always greedy for more, but the godly love to give. I know that talking about money can be a touchy subject for people, and our aim is not to guilt you into giving more money. Money matters because how we handle our money not only shows us what we truly love, but the way we handle our money has a direct impact on the health of our souls. But bigger than that, God's desire is for us to be generous, and we want you to be aligning your life with God. So let me encourage you. Consider the practice of a tithe. Before you do anything else with your money, designate a percentage of it to give away, and then budget what's left over to meet the different needs in your life. So let's pre-decide that instead of giving when it's convenient, and instead of giving out of what's left over, we're going to be generous people and have a plan to give out of our first fruits. Now, I hope your discussion goes well today with your groups, and we will see you next week.